All right, welcome to the deep dive, everybody. Today we're going to be looking into something really fundamental to how AI language models work.
Yeah. It's pretty interesting stuff, actually.
Yeah, and for you, the listener, this is going to be one of those deep dive that you come away with a really different perspective on things, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. It's the way that AI language models work is pretty different from how humans work, and it has some interesting consequences.
Yeah, and we're gonna get into that today. We're gonna talk about specifically whether or not AI thinks one word at a time.
Right. And what that means, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So the material that we're working off of today comes from a discussion that was had about AI language models. And it's actually a pretty meaty discussion. There's a lot in there to unpack.
Yeah, and it's a topic that's really relevant right now because we see these AI language models everywhere, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I feel like we can't go a day without hearing about ChatGPT or one of these other big models, right? So,
Exactly.
so what we're going to try and do today is really get down to the fundamentals of how these models actually process language.
Right. And then we're going to compare that to how humans process language,
Right.
which is as we'll see, very different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that comparison, I think, is what's going to be really eye-opening for the listener.
Right.
So let's just jump right into it. So the way these AI language models, like Grok, actually produce text is by predicting one token at a time.
Yeah, and maybe we should explain what a token is.
Yeah, that's a good point. I
Yeah.
mean, not everyone who's listening is necessarily going to know that term. So a token is basically, it can be a word, it can be part of a word. It's just like the smallest unit of language that these systems are working with.
Right. Yeah. And the key thing to understand is that the model is calculating the probability for what that next token should be based on all the text that it's seen so far.
So it's looking at the context. It's not just like randomly choosing a word.
Exactly.
It's looking at, okay, what came before? What's the most likely thing to come next based on everything that I've already seen?
Right. And this is what we call autoregressive generation. It means that each token is generated based on the ones that came before it.
So it's building it sequentially, one prediction after another.
Exactly.
Okay, so that sounds pretty straightforward, but it also sounds like it could potentially get stuck in a rut.
Right. Right. Yeah. Like if it's always just picking the most probable next token, it's going to end up generating very predictable and maybe even boring text.
Yeah, like it'll just be the same kind of cliched phrases over and over again.
Exact.
So what do they do to kind of get around that?
So that's where techniques like sampling come in. Sampling is basically a way to introduce randomness into the model's choices.
Okay, so instead of always going with the most obvious word, it's kind of like rolling the dice a little bit.
Right. So instead of picking the token with the absolute highest probability, the model will pick from a set of tokens with high probabilities, but not necessarily the highest one.
Okay, so how does that work in practice? What are the different ways to do sampling?
So there are a couple of common methods. One is called top case sampling,
Top case sampling.
and that basically means let's say the model has a list of the top 10 most likely next tokens. Instead of always picking number one, it'll randomly select from one of those top 10.
Okay, so it's still looking at the most likely options, but it's not just like laser focused on the absolute most likely.
Right, and the K in top K just determines how many of those top options it considers.
Okay, I get it.
Another approach is top sampling. Sometimes it's called nucleus sampling. And in this case, the model looks at the most likely tokens and it keeps adding them up based on their probabilities until it reaches a certain threshold.
Okay, like 90%.
Yeah, exactly. And then
Yeah.
it randomly picks one of the tokens within that set.
Oh, I see. So top K is like saying, let's look at the top five contenders and pick one of them. And top is more like, let's gather all the most likely options until we're pretty sure we've got a good set, and then pick from there.
That's a great way to put it. And then there's another interesting parameter called temperature.
Temperature, what does that mean?
Yeah, so think of temperature as a dial that controls how random the model is.
Okay.
So if you turn the temperature up, the model is more likely to pick less probable tokens, which can lead to more surprising or even creative output.
Ah, so turning up the temperature is like loosening the rules a little bit.
Exactly.
It might lead to some interesting choices, but it could also lead to something that doesn't quite make sense. It's a
Exactly.
delicate balance, right?
Right. A lower temperature makes the model more focused and deterministic, sticking very close to those high probability tokens.
Okay. So we've got this sampling thing going on, but then there's also something called beam search.
Right.
which is kind of different, right?
Right. Yeah, beam search is a much more deliberate and less random approach. Instead of just picking one token at a time, the model keeps track of multiple potential sequences of tokens.
So instead of just like going down one path, it's kind of exploring multiple paths at the same time.
Exactly. And at each step, it scores these different sequences and keeps the top scoring ones.
Oh, I see. So it's like a competition between different possible continuations of the text.
Right, exactly.
And the beam width determines how many of these sequences it keeps track of.
Exactly.
But but that sounds pretty computationally expensive.
It is. I mean, if you have a beam width of 5, you're essentially doing 5 times the calculations at each step compared to just predicting one token.
So it can get pretty resource intensive.
It can, yeah.
Okay, so why bother with it then if it's so expensive?
Well, because it often leads to more coherent and polished output, especially for tasks where accuracy and fluency are really important, like translation.
Okay, so it's good for tasks where you need a really high quality output.
Exactly.
Huh.
But it's not ideal for situations where you need a quick response or where a little bit of unpredictability is desired.
Right, right. Okay, so we've talked about how AI generates language,
Hmm.
but it seems pretty different from how humans do it, right?
Yeah, I mean, when I'm speaking, I'm not thinking about each individual word. I'm thinking about ideas and concepts.
Yeah, exactly. Like I have a general idea of what I want to
Hmm.
say, and the words just kind of come out.
Right.
And I'm not consciously planning out each individual word.
And the interesting thing is that brain science supports this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, our brains don't process language word by word.
Hmm.
We think and plan in terms of larger chunks of meaning.
So AI is processing language in a very linear way,
Hmm.
one token at a time.
Right.
But humans are doing something much more complex and holistic.
Exactly. And this difference is really important because it highlights one of the limitations of current AI systems.
Yeah, for our listener who's really interested in understanding information efficiently, this is a key point. AI is not thinking the way we think.
Right. And that means that there are certain things that AI is not very good at, like understanding humor or sarcasm or irony.
Right, right, exactly. So where is the field going with this? I mean, are people working on making AI more human-like in its thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of exciting research going on right now aimed at developing models that can move beyond this token by token generation.
So what kind of approaches are people taking?
Well, one promising area is what we call hierarchical models.
Hierarchical models.
Yeah, so the idea here is that the AI would first generate a high-level plan or outline of what it wants to communicate.
Oh, okay. So it's like it's making a plan before it starts writing.
Exactly. And then it would go back and fill in the details, generating the actual sentences and words within that predefined structure.
It's interesting. It's almost like how we might outline a report or a presentation before we start writing the actual text.
Yeah, exactly. And Google has been doing some very interesting work in this area.
Oh, wow. Okay. So what else is out there?
Another approach is what we call chain of thought and tree of thoughts.
Chain of thought and tree of thoughts.
Yeah, so these techniques involve the AI explicitly reasoning through a sequence of intermediate steps before it generates the final text.
So instead of just spitting out the most probable next word, it's actually thinking through the logic of its response.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and XAI has been actively developing these methods.
Okay, so we've got hierarchical models, we've got chain of thought and tree of thoughts. Are there any other approaches that are being explored?
Yeah, there's also something called latent space planning.
Latent space planning.
Yeah, so in this approach, the AI essentially thinks and plans in terms of abstract semantic concepts. You could almost think of them as like idea packets.
Okay.
And only after this abstract planning phase does it then translate these conceptual representations into actual sentences and words.
That sounds pretty advanced.
It is. It's still in the early stages of research, but it's a very promising area.
Okay, so we're seeing a lot of different approaches here,
Mhm.
but they all seem to have one thing in common, which is that they're trying to get AI to think in a more structured and planned way.
Exactly.
Is there anything else out there?
Yeah, there's also research into neuro-inspired models.
Neuro-inspired models.
These models are designed to mimic the layered processing of the human brain.
Oh, wow. So they're trying to get AI to think more like how our brains work.
Right. They start with high-level goals and intentions and gradually move down to the specific details of language production.
That's amazing. But that also sounds really challenging.
It is. It's one of the most difficult areas of AI research.
Hmm.
The human brain is incredibly complex, and we're still learning about how it works.
But the potential benefits are huge, right? I mean, if we can get AI to think more like humans, then it could potentially do all sorts of things that it can't do now.
Right, and it could interact with us in a much more natural and intuitive way.
Yeah, and that's really what our listener is interested in, right? Those aha moments, those moments where AI really seems to understand us.
Exactly.
So to sum up, what we've learned today is that while current AI language models are very impressive, they still process language in a very different way from humans.
Right, and this difference has important implications for what AI can and cannot do.
But the field is rapidly evolving, and there's a lot of exciting research going on that's aimed at making AI more human-like in its thinking.
Exactly. And for you, the listener, understanding this fundamental difference is key to appreciating the current capabilities of AI and its future potential.
It really is food for thought. So,
Yeah.
so as you go about your day, think about how your own thought processes work. How do you plan and organize your thoughts? Are there times when you think in a very linear way, step by step? And are there times when you think in a much more holistic and conceptual way? It's a fascinating question to consider, and it gives you a glimpse into the challenges and opportunities of AI research.
I think that's a great place to leave it.
All right, well, thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive today, and we'll see you next time.
See you then.
Bye.
Bye.